Imagine a world where your education is determined not by your abilities, but by the prejudices others have about you, where a student's potential is dismissed simply because of the color of their skin, their name, or their background. This is not a dystopian fantasy. This is a reality for millions of children today. But what if we could change that? In the next few minutes, we'll dive into a powerful story about Lily, a young girl whose journey highlights the heartbreaking consequences of discrimination in education. A system that, instead of nurturing her, is pushing her further into the shadows. But this isn't just Lily's story. It's the story of every child who faces unjust barriers in their pursuit of education, simply because of who they are. It's the story of every parent who fights for their child's right to be seen, heard, and valued. This issue isn't confined to one classroom, one school, or even one country. In 2025, we are still grappling with the age-old issue of discrimination in education, but we have the power to do something about it. So, what is it that needs to change? And how can we, as a society, fight for a future where every child, regardless of their race, gender, or background, has a fair shot at success? Let's find out together. Before we dive deeper into this story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more important stories like this to light. Now, let's explore the journey of Lily and what we can learn from her experience. Lily's story begins not with the first day of school, but with a quiet moment at home. Her parents, filled with hope for her future, sat down together, going over the school materials and preparations. It's an image familiar to many families across the world, parents who dream of a brighter future for their children, and children who, full of potential, are ready to embrace the possibilities ahead of them. For Lily, this moment should have been filled with excitement, anticipation, and optimism. Instead, it was clouded with anxiety and fear. Fear of what the school system might hold for her. Fear of being judged before she even walked through the classroom door. Lily is a bright, curious child with a passion for learning, her love for reading, her curiosity about the world around her, and her determination to do her best should have made her an ideal student. But there's one thing that sets her apart from her classmates: her background. Lily is black, and the color of her skin has already begun to shape the way others perceive her. From an early age, Lily had been taught that the world might not always see her the way she saw herself. But nothing could prepare her for the stark reality of how prejudice would unfold in the very place where she should have felt most safe: her school. The challenges Lily faces are not isolated. Every year, countless children across the world walk into classrooms where they are judged not by their abilities, but by stereotypes and assumptions about who they are. In fact, research shows that children of color are disproportionately disciplined, placed in lower academic tracks, and given fewer opportunities to excel in educational settings. These systemic barriers are so deeply ingrained that they often go unnoticed by those who aren't directly affected by them. Lily's experience is one of many, but her story is a powerful illustration of how discrimination in education can shape a child's future. Imagine, for a moment, that you're a student like Lily. You walk into a classroom filled with hope, only to encounter the subtle, but very real, prejudices that lurk within the system. You are asked to prove yourself more than others, not because of anything you've done, but because of how others view you. And every time you try to rise above the expectations placed upon you, the system seems to push you back down. The educational institutions that should nurture you, empower you, and help you grow seem to have a different agenda, one that is influenced by stereotypes, biases, and assumptions. This isn't just a personal issue. This is a systemic problem. Lily's teachers, like most educators, are not bad people. They may not even be aware of their own biases. But that's the point. The education system itself is designed in a way that perpetuates inequality, even when individuals within the system want to do the right thing. Implicit biases, often formed by years of societal conditioning, shape how teachers interact with their students. The biases may not be overt or intentional, but they have real consequences. When Lily's teachers overlook her potential or assume she is less capable than her classmates, they are making decisions based on these biases. And Lily, though bright and hardworking, is the one who suffers. One of the most insidious parts of this problem is that discrimination in education is often so subtle, so woven into the fabric of the system, that it's easy for those not directly affected to overlook. It's in the way a teacher might give more attention to a white student than to a black student, or in the way a student of color might be more harshly disciplined for a similar infraction. It's in the underfunded schools that disproportionately serve black and brown communities, where resources are scarce and opportunities are limited. It's in the advanced placement courses where students of color are often underrepresented, despite being just as capable as their peers. Lily's experience is a stark reminder that we cannot afford to ignore the systemic racism that exists within our educational institutions. Discrimination in education isn't just about a few bad actors. It's about a system that was never built with all children in mind. The impact of this inequality isn't just academic. It affects every part of a child's life, from their self-esteem to their future opportunities. And for children like Lily, this discrimination can have lasting effects that extend far beyond the classroom. But it's also important to remember that while Lily's story may be heartbreaking, it's not the end of the story. Her journey is part of a larger movement for change, a movement that seeks to address the deep inequalities in our educational system. Across the globe, parents, educators, and advocates are working tirelessly to ensure that every child, regardless of their background, has access to the same opportunities and resources. This movement is gaining momentum, and with the right policies, awareness, and collective action, we can work toward creating an educational system that truly serves all students. So, while Lily's story serves as a painful reminder of how much work remains to be done, it also represents hope, a hope that we can change the narrative and ensure that future generations of students are judged by their abilities, not by their race or background. It's a call to action for us all to recognize the discrimination that still exists in our schools and take concrete steps to eradicate it. Lily's story begins in a small town where the sun sets over the horizon, casting a warm glow over her neighborhood. Her family lives in a modest home on a quiet street, surrounded by a community of hardworking individuals who, like Lily's parents, value education and strive for a better future. Her parents, both college-educated, were determined to provide their daughter with every opportunity to succeed. They were proud of her inquisitive nature, her love of books, and her bright, imaginative mind. As a young child, Lily's world was filled with exploration. She would spend hours in the library, losing herself in stories about far-off places, historical figures, and adventures that stretched the limits of her imagination. Her curiosity about the world around her was insatiable, and her parents nurtured this love of learning, believing that one day Lily would go on to achieve great things. But the reality of school would soon challenge these aspirations in ways her parents never imagined. When Lily entered elementary school, she walked through the doors with excitement, eager to learn and make new friends. She was ready to take on the challenges that lay ahead. However, the first sign that her experience might be different came when her teacher, Mrs. Johnson, made her way down the rows of desks on the first day of class. She stopped in front of Lily and smiled warmly, but her gaze seemed to linger a little too long. Mrs. Johnson's eyes shifted to Lily's classmates, and her smile widened, but something felt off. Lily couldn't understand it at the time, but she would soon come to realize that being a black student in an overwhelmingly white classroom meant she would be treated differently. At first, the differences were subtle. Mrs. Johnson praised Lily for being a quick learner, but when it came to assigning tasks or recognizing her achievements, Lily noticed that her efforts were often overlooked. The classroom seemed to operate under an unspoken rule that Lily's work wasn't as deserving of attention as the work of her white classmates. For example, when Lily correctly answered a question, Mrs. Johnson would quickly move on to the next student, not giving her the same praise she gave to others. This happened consistently, and Lily's classmates began to take note. Over time, Lily started to internalize the messages she was receiving from her teacher and classmates. She began to question whether her contributions were truly valued. When it came time for group projects, Lily found herself assigned to the back corner, often with the same small group of students who were equally ignored. It was as though she had become invisible in a space that should have been nurturing and empowering. Lily's parents, who had always been her greatest supporters, began to notice the change in her. She became quieter, more withdrawn. Her enthusiasm for learning, which had once been so contagious, began to fade. When they asked her about school, she would give short, distracted answers, no longer excited to talk about what she had learned. It was clear that something was wrong, but her parents couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. They assumed she was just having trouble adjusting to the new environment. It wasn't until Lily's mother, Angela, attended a parent-teacher conference that the truth began to emerge. Mrs. Johnson, in a polite but indirect manner, informed Angela that Lily was struggling to keep up with her classmates. She attributed it to Lily's difficulty adjusting to the curriculum. But Angela knew her daughter was more than capable. She had seen Lily's potential, and her grades didn't reflect the struggles Mrs. Johnson described. Something deeper was at play. Angela decided to observe Lily's interactions more closely, both at school and at home. She began to notice the subtle ways in which Lily was treated differently by her teachers and peers. When Lily's classmates raised their hands to answer questions, they were often given more encouragement and praise. But when Lily answered a question correctly, the response was muted, as though it wasn't as impressive as the answers given by others. She could see it in the way Mrs. Johnson spoke to Lily, often using a more patronizing tone, as if she needed to be spoken to differently because of her race. Angela realized that what was happening to Lily wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a reflection of the biases that existed in the school system. Lily wasn't being judged on her abilities or potential. Instead, she was being judged based on her race. Angela's heart sank as she recognized the painful truth. Lily was being discriminated against by the very people who were supposed to support her growth and development. As the months went by, Lily's experiences at school became increasingly difficult. She began to dread going to class, her excitement for learning replaced by a feeling of isolation. She watched as her classmates, who were given the benefit of the doubt, soared in their studies. Meanwhile, Lily found herself stuck in a cycle where her achievements were disregarded or minimized. Her self-esteem began to suffer, and she started to question whether she was truly good enough to succeed. At home, Angela and her husband, James, had many difficult conversations. They knew they had to take action, but they didn't know where to begin. They considered switching Lily to a different school, but they realized that the problem wasn't confined to just one teacher. It was systemic. The biases Lily faced were rooted in the very structure of the educational system, and moving her to another school wouldn't solve the underlying issue. Angela began researching ways to address the discrimination Lily was facing. She reached out to other parents who had similar experiences, and together, they started advocating for change. They attended school board meetings, raised awareness about the systemic racism in the school system, and pushed for training on implicit bias for teachers and staff. It wasn't easy, and progress was slow, but Angela knew that change was possible. In the meantime, Lily's parents made a conscious effort to reaffirm her worth and encourage her love for learning at home. They helped her develop a strong sense of identity, one that was rooted in pride and resilience. Angela and James knew that no matter how the school system treated her, they would always be there to remind Lily of her incredible potential. Lily's journey, though challenging, is a powerful reminder that the fight for equality in education is ongoing. It's not just about one teacher or one school. It's about dismantling the systemic biases that exist within the system itself. Lily's story is one of perseverance, but also one of hope. Through the support of her family and the collective efforts of the community, Lily began to regain her confidence and find her voice once again. Her story, though painful, is a beacon for change. It reminds us that no child should ever have to feel invisible in the classroom. Every student deserves the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their race or background. And it's up to all of us, parents, educators, and advocates, to ensure that the future of education is one where every child has the chance to succeed. Lily's story is not an isolated one. Across the country, children from marginalized communities, particularly Black and Latino students, face similar barriers within the education system. These stories, while heartbreaking, are essential to understand in the broader context of systemic inequality. By examining real-world cases, we can gain valuable insights into how discrimination and biases manifest in educational environments, as well as the steps we can take to address these challenges. One such case involves a student named Jamal, a high school junior from an urban district, who faced overt racial bias from his teacher. Despite consistently scoring high on his assignments and demonstrating exceptional intelligence, Jamal was often overlooked by his teacher when it came to class participation. His peers, who were predominantly white, received more encouragement and praise for similar efforts. Jamal's contributions were either ignored or dismissed, while others were given credit for similar answers. The teacher's behavior made Jamal feel as if his intellect wasn't valued. His self-confidence began to erode, and his academic performance began to decline. It wasn't until Jamal's parents intervened, addressing the issue with the school administration, that the teacher's behavior was examined. The school was forced to acknowledge the implicit biases that were influencing the way Jamal was treated. After months of meetings and consultations, the school implemented new measures for teacher training, emphasizing cultural competency and the importance of recognizing implicit bias. This case illustrates the detrimental impact that unchecked biases can have on a student's academic trajectory. When students are not given equal opportunities to succeed, their belief in their own abilities can diminish, leading to lower performance and a decreased sense of motivation. The lesson here is clear. Addressing racial discrimination in schools is not just about changing policies, but about fostering an environment where every student feels valued and capable. Another powerful example comes from the story of Rosa, a young girl attending a middle school in a predominantly white suburban district. Rosa, an immigrant from Mexico, faced language barriers that made it difficult for her to fully participate in class discussions. Despite her intelligence and strong work ethic, Rosa was frequently placed in lower-level courses due to her English proficiency, even though she demonstrated an understanding of the material that exceeded the expectations for her grade level. Her teachers, however, assumed that her language barrier indicated a lack of ability in other areas. Rosa's parents, who were immigrants themselves, were deeply concerned. They advocated for their daughter by requesting meetings with the school's guidance counselor and administrators. After extensive discussions, Rosa was moved into more advanced courses, where she excelled. Her story highlights the importance of viewing students holistically, not just through the lens of one characteristic like language proficiency. Rosa's case teaches us that biases, both implicit and explicit, can limit a student's potential if not properly addressed. It is critical for schools to recognize the full range of a student's abilities and provide opportunities for growth beyond what is immediately visible. In another case, a group of African American students in a predominantly white high school experienced discrimination from their peers, which also influenced how their teachers treated them. These students faced microaggressions in the classroom, with their ideas often disregarded or undermined by both classmates and teachers. One particularly striking incident involved a teacher who was dismissive of an African American student's answer, only to praise the same answer when it was repeated by a white classmate. This overt disregard for the student's voice fostered an environment where these young people felt less likely to participate in class discussions. After these incidents were reported to the school's leadership, the district implemented a program to combat racial microaggressions and bias in the classroom. Teachers received specialized training on how to recognize and address microaggressions, while students participated in workshops aimed at increasing empathy and cultural awareness. The school district also established a diversity and inclusion task force to ensure that students' experiences of discrimination would be addressed more proactively. These real-world examples, though each unique, share common threads of discrimination, bias, and the negative impact they have on students' educational journeys. The overarching lesson from these cases is that systemic racism and discrimination cannot be tackled with surface-level changes alone. It requires comprehensive efforts to address bias at every level of the educational system, from teacher training to policy development, and from student support services to classroom environments. Another key lesson is that advocacy from both students and parents plays a crucial role in addressing these issues. In all the cases above, it was the students' families who stood up against the bias and discrimination, demanding that their children be treated with fairness and respect. These families understood that advocating for a child's right to a fair education is not just about addressing individual injustices, but also about ensuring that systemic changes are made for the benefit of all students. What's clear from these real-world examples is that schools must adopt a more inclusive, equitable approach to education, one that actively works to dismantle the barriers that disproportionately affect marginalized students. Teachers, administrators, and staff must be trained to recognize their own biases and to create classrooms where all students, regardless of race, ethnicity, or background, can thrive. The examples above serve as a stark reminder that while the education system may offer opportunities, it can also perpetuate inequalities. For students like Lily, Jamal, and Rosa, the path to success is often fraught with challenges that their peers may never encounter. But these stories also highlight the resilience of students, families, and communities who refuse to accept inequality as the status quo. By listening to these stories and learning from the experiences of others, we can collectively take meaningful steps toward a more equitable and inclusive education system for all. Adeline's fight against discrimination in the biased education system goes beyond the personal battles she faced in the classroom. It is, in many ways, a larger metaphor for the struggles that countless other students from marginalized communities face every day. Adeline's resilience, paired with the support of her family, paints a broader picture of the obstacles and victories that come with advocating for equity and justice within educational institutions. Adeline's story begins in a classroom where she, a bright and driven Black student, faced subtle but consistent forms of discrimination. Despite her academic success and commitment to excellence, Adeline found herself sidelined by a teacher who consistently overlooked her contributions in favor of her white peers. The teacher's bias was not overt, but it was undeniable. It manifested in the way Adeline's ideas were brushed aside, or when her achievements were downplayed. Adeline's experience was not the result of overt cruelty, but of a system that had long been conditioned to favor certain students over others based on race and background. At first, Adeline struggled to reconcile the love she had for learning with the constant feeling of being undermined. She would participate in discussions, offering insights that were thoughtful and well-informed, only to see her classmates receive praise for similar answers. Her teachers, who often expressed surprise at her accomplishments, failed to recognize the systemic bias that impacted how they treated her. It was only when her mother, a strong advocate for her education, began to notice the subtle inequities that Adeline had begun to internalize that things began to change. Adeline's mother, a passionate advocate for social justice, took the initiative to meet with the school's administration. What followed was a series of difficult and eye-opening conversations about race, bias, and the way these factors affected Adeline's educational experience. It became clear that Adeline's situation was not an isolated one. Many students, particularly Black and Latino students, were being systematically overlooked or held to lower expectations. Teachers, administrators, and even students had long been conditioned to see certain students as less capable, a mindset that contributed to lower expectations and unequal treatment in the classroom. In the meetings with the school, Adeline's mother was met with resistance at first. Some of the administrators were reluctant to acknowledge the problem, while others attempted to downplay the significance of the issue. But Adeline's mother refused to let the issue slide. She demanded that the school not only address her daughter's specific case, but also examine the systemic issues at play. The conversations were difficult, but they were necessary. Slowly but surely, the school began to recognize the need for change. The administration agreed to implement anti-bias training for teachers and staff, and began to overhaul its disciplinary policies to ensure fairer treatment for all students. While these changes were important, they weren't enough to undo the damage already done to Adeline. The emotional toll of being consistently ignored in favor of others had taken its toll on her self-esteem. For months, Adeline had questioned her own worth, wondering if she was as intelligent and capable as her teachers seemed to believe. It took time and effort for her to regain her confidence, But she didn't do it alone. With the continued support of her family, especially her mother, who always reminded her of her worth, Adeline found the strength to push through. Adeline's fight was not just about changing the way she was treated by her teacher. It was about ensuring that other students wouldn't have to endure the same struggles. Her mother advocated not only for her daughter, but also for the entire student body. With a deep belief that education should be equitable for all, she pushed for systemic changes in the curriculum, staff training, and disciplinary procedures. These changes, while difficult to implement, began to create a more inclusive environment for all students, one where no student would feel as though they were being denied an opportunity based on their race or background. Through this experience, Adeline learned an important lesson about advocacy. She learned that change doesn't always come easily, and sometimes it requires difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. But she also learned that when students, parents, and communities work together, they can make a difference. Adeline's story serves as a reminder that while the fight for equality in education is ongoing, it is also one that can lead to tangible change when people refuse to accept the status quo. Adeline's journey is a powerful illustration of the emotional and psychological effects that systemic discrimination can have on students, especially when their potential is undervalued. Her experience also sheds light on the role of advocacy and parental involvement in combating these issues. Her mother's steadfast support was critical in ensuring that the school not only addressed the specific issue of bias against Adeline, but also took broader steps to create a more inclusive and equitable educational environment. What stands out most in Adeline's story is her resilience. Despite facing discrimination, she did not give up on her education or on herself. She understood that her fight was not just about her, but about future generations of students who might face similar challenges. Adeline's courage to stand up for herself and the strength to work alongside her mother to change the system is a reminder that true progress comes not from individuals accepting the status quo but from actively challenging it. Adeline's fight is a reflection of the broader struggle for equity and justice within education. Her story, while personal, is connected to the stories of countless other students who face the same challenges. It is through these struggles that we can begin to understand the magnitude of the issue, and more importantly, the power of collective action in creating lasting change. Adeline's battle was not just about her educational experience. It was a fight for the rights and dignity of all students who have been marginalized, overlooked, or treated unfairly in schools. As we look toward 2025 and beyond, it's clear that the role of parenting and advocacy within the context of education will continue to evolve. Parents and guardians, now more than ever, are recognizing their critical role in shaping their children's educational experiences and are taking action to ensure that their voices are heard. Advocacy, especially when it comes to combating bias, discrimination, and systemic inequalities, has become a crucial element of parenting in a rapidly changing educational landscape. In the past, many parents may have assumed that their children would simply learn in the classroom, trusting teachers and schools to create a fair and supportive environment. However, as stories like Adeline's show, this is no longer the case for many students. Increasingly, parents are seeing that their children's success is not just about academic performance, but about navigating a system that may not always treat them fairly, particularly if they come from marginalized backgrounds. The responsibility of ensuring that children have access to the same opportunities as their peers has shifted from solely relying on the school system to also taking an active role in dismantling biases and advocating for justice. The year 2025 represents a unique point in time where technology and social media have given parents more tools than ever before to hold schools accountable. Digital platforms allow parents to amplify their voices, connect with others facing similar struggles, and access resources that can help them navigate the often complex world of educational advocacy. The rise of online communities, educational forums, and social movements like #Black Lives Matter and #MeToo have fostered a culture of resistance, where parents and caregivers are more likely to question systems that perpetuate inequality. These platforms give parents the space to share their stories, exchange advice, and demand change, not just for their children, but for all children who are underserved or oppressed by the system. This shift toward more active and vocal parenting is also influenced by the growing recognition of the intersectionality of issues like race, class, and gender within educational settings. In 2025, parents are becoming more aware of how these factors intersect to create unique barriers for students from underrepresented communities. As a result, parenting has become increasingly focused on providing children with the tools they need to thrive in a world where they may be judged not only by their academic performance, but also by their identity. This means fostering resilience, critical thinking, and self-advocacy skills, as well as equipping children with the knowledge to challenge discriminatory practices when they encounter them. One of the central aspects of advocacy in 2025 will be addressing and correcting biased policies that persist within educational systems, from biased grading practices to discriminatory disciplinary actions. The educational system has long been a place where systemic inequities are perpetuated. Advocacy is not only about defending individual children, as seen in Adeline's case, but about working toward large-scale institutional changes that ensure all students, regardless of their background, have equal access to the opportunities and resources they need to succeed. In this context, parents and communities will need to work in tandem with teachers, administrators, and policymakers to push for systemic changes. Schools cannot fix these issues alone. Parents have the power to advocate for structural reforms, such as anti-bias training for teachers, curriculum reform that reflects the diverse experiences of students, and stronger policies that protect against discrimination. However, this advocacy is only effective when it is backed by sustained collective action. Individual parents can make a difference, but it is when entire communities rally together that real change is achieved. One key challenge of parenting and advocacy in 2025 will be combating the growing disparities in access to educational resources. While some schools are equipped with state-of-the-art technology and offer a wealth of extracurricular activities, others struggle to provide basic educational materials and maintain safe, welcoming environments. This disparity is particularly evident in low-income and rural areas, where students of color and those from working-class families are disproportionately affected. In 2025, addressing these inequalities will require not only local and state-level efforts, but also national policy changes that ensure every student has access to a high-quality education, regardless of their zip code. Additionally, the mental health and emotional well-being of students will become an increasingly important focus of parental advocacy, with rising concerns over stress, anxiety, and depression among young people, particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Parents are advocating for schools to prioritize mental health support. This includes pushing for increased access to counselors, mental health resources, and a school culture that emphasizes emotional well-being alongside academic success. Advocacy for mental health services in schools is not just about addressing the needs of individual students, but also about creating an educational environment where all students feel safe, supported, and understood. The future of parenting and advocacy in education will also see a shift in how parents interact with schools. Instead of simply being passive recipients of information, parents will take on the role of partners in the educational process. This will involve regular communication with teachers, participating in school board meetings, and being proactive in identifying areas where their children might be facing inequities. In many ways, this is a return to the idea of community-driven education, where parents and educators work together to create a curriculum and school culture that reflects the diverse needs of all students. As we approach 2025, the fight for educational equity is no longer just about ensuring that children are academically successful. It is about ensuring that every child is treated with respect, fairness, and dignity. The advocacy movement is expanding, and parents are at the forefront, pushing for systemic changes that will ensure a more just and equitable future for their children. These efforts will lay the foundation for a new generation of students who will not only excel in their academic endeavors, but also carry with them the understanding that true success is rooted in fairness and equality. As we reach the conclusion of this journey through the world of educational advocacy, it is evident that the fight for fairness and equality in education is not only necessary but urgent. Stories like Adeline's remind us of the systemic barriers that continue to impact children in our schools, and how those barriers often extend far beyond the classroom. Discrimination in education isn't just about what happens within the walls of a school. It's about how students are perceived, how they are treated, and how their futures are shaped by policies that may not always have their best interests at heart. However, the power to make a change lies not just in the hands of policymakers or educators, but in each one of us. Parents, caregivers, and communities are the driving force behind this movement. It's through the collective efforts of individuals standing together, raising their voices, and demanding accountability that we can build a more just and equitable education system. This fight, though challenging, is not without hope. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to a larger movement toward change. In 2025, we are standing at a crossroads. The tools and platforms available to us, whether through social media, advocacy organizations, or local communities, are more powerful than ever. This is the moment to use these resources to hold schools accountable and ensure that no child is left behind due to their race, background, gender, or socioeconomic status. But we must also look forward and work together to create new systems of education that are inclusive, empowering, and focused on the needs of all students. Now, more than ever, we must continue to advocate for anti-bias training in schools, for policies that promote diversity and inclusion, and for the creation of safe spaces where all students can thrive without fear of discrimination. We must demand that mental health resources be integrated into educational systems, acknowledging that the well-being of our children is just as important as their academic success. We must push for greater equity and access to quality education, ensuring that all schools, regardless of their location or funding, provide the same opportunities for growth and success. As parents, advocates, and community members, we have a responsibility to step up and take action. It's not enough to recognize the problems. We must be the catalyst for change. If you are a parent, speak with your school administrators about the issues that matter most to you. Attend school board meetings. Get involved in advocacy groups that focus on education reform. If you are a teacher or administrator, use your platform to challenge discriminatory practices and push for a curriculum that reflects the diverse experiences of your students. If you are simply an engaged citizen, lend your voice to campaigns that fight for educational justice. But the fight doesn't end here. I want to hear from you. What steps are you taking in your community to ensure that every child receives the education they deserve? Share your stories in the comments, and let's continue this conversation. Together, we can build an education system that empowers every child to reach their full potential, free from the chains of discrimination and bias. Finally, if you found this video insightful, consider supporting our work by liking, subscribing, and sharing with others who may benefit from this important discussion. Your support is crucial in keeping this movement alive. And if you're looking for more ways to get involved, check out the links in the description for advocacy groups and resources that can help you make a difference in your community. Let's continue to stand together, advocate for what's right, and ensure that the future of education is one where every child has an equal opportunity to succeed.